Good evening, everyone. Hope that all of you are doing well. Thank you so much for joining us for today's episode of BioTalknology. We're really grateful for your support. We're just going to wait for a couple of minutes for everyone to join in before we start. In the meantime, let me just announce that this is the 10th episode of BioTalknology, something that started about 2 years back. BioTalknology is a talk series with global leaders who make a difference. The essence is to engage with leaders in an informal setting. And earlier it used to happen in person, and now over Zoom, because we have leaders from across the globe. This is broadcast live, and our audiences get to understand the leader, their thoughts, achievement, tips for success. And our audiences are typically across various sectors, primarily from biospace, pharma, diagnostics, hospitals, etc. This discussion spans about 25 to 30 minutes, followed by an interactive session where the audiences get to ask their questions. In fact, once the talk begins, feel free to share your questions in the chat window with me. I will pick some of them up in the time limit that is permitted and share them with the panelists, and they would, be happy to answer those questions for us all. So let's begin. Today's topic for discussion is leading the pursuit of novel medicine. Our guest today is Dr. Rahul Singhvi, who is the co-founder and CEO of Resilience. From Premas Biotech, we have co-founder and managing director, Dr. Prabudha Kundu. Dr. Rahul Singhvi's entrepreneurial spirit and dynamic leadership has been an inspiration to many. I'm not going to keep you waiting for much longer. I invite Dr. Prabudha Kundu to kindly introduce our guest today and begin the conversation.
Thank you so much, Malvika. As usual, it's a deep honor and a great honor to have Dr. Rahul Singhvi. Rahul, welcome to Biotechnology.
Thank you, PK. It's great to be here.
Thank you. So for everyone on the call today, let me quickly take this opportunity and honor to introduce to you Dr. Rahul Singhvi. Dr. Rahul Singhvi is a global leader in the life sciences industry and serves as the Chief Executive Officer of National Resilience, Inc. Previous to this, Rahul was the operating partner at the flagship Pioneering, a Boston-based life sciences innovation firm, where he was responsible for founding and operating companies launched from the flagship's innovation foundry, Flagship Labs. Before joining Flagship, Rahul was the Chief Operating Officer of Takeda Vaccine Business Unit, where he was responsible for the worldwide vaccine CMC and manufacturing operations. During his 6-year tenure at Takeda, the vaccine business grew to over 500 employees and created an industry-leading late-stage pipeline of vaccine candidates such as dengue, norovirus, and Zika. Before Takeda, Rahul was the president and CEO of Novavax, where he transformed the company from a specialty pharmaceutical business to a vaccine development company with vaccine candidates against influenza, which was funded by BARDA and RSV. Rahul's professional career began at Merck & Company in 1994, where he held several positions in R&D and manufacturing. Rahul also serves in the executive advisory board of the Leonard Davis Institute of Health Economics at the University of Pennsylvania and on the scientific advisory board of the Antimicrobial Resistance Research Group at the Singapore MIT Advanced Research and Technology Program. He's also the mentor instructor in the undergraduate projects program UPOP at MIT and is a visiting lecturer at the University College of London, UCL. Dr. Singhvi graduated as a top-ranked chemical engineer from the Indian Institute of Technology, Kanpur, India, and has obtained his MS and DSc degrees in chemical engineering at MIT. He received an MBA from the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania, where he graduated as the Palmer Scholar. With that, it's a deep honor to have Dr. Rahul Singhvi join us. Rahul, welcome to Biotechnology.
Thank you again. Okay.
So with that, Rahul, I think it's my absolute honor to start this thing. You've had a fascinating journey so far. I mean, from India to US, and as we weaved and heard through some of the great organizations, both in pharmaceutical sciences and vaccines. So with that, I think it would be very interesting for our audience to hear if you could elaborate from your journey from early days of school in India to your research in the US.
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to do that. Again, first of all, thank you for making this great forum available to me to be able to tell you more about my journey. I started my career, as you know, in 1994 in the United States. But before that, I was in India. I was born in Jaipur and studied at the ScFv school in Jaipur. And after that, I went to IIT Kanpur, where I studied chemical engineering. And as many students from IIT, they go abroad, and I did the same. I was very, frankly, very honored that I got a scholarship to go to MIT, where when I got there, I had no idea what I wanted to do, except that it was just a fascinating place. I just had a little bit of inspiration in biology, since both my parents had biology sort of background. My father is a doctor, my mother is a professor in botany, and so there was biotech or biology in the family. And even though I studied hardcore chemical engineering at IIT and had no exposure to biology in IIT Kanpur, when I got to MIT and I saw what kind of research was going on, it was apparent that this new field of biotechnology was just emerging, and applications of chemical engineering to this field were very fascinating to me. And so I have a great story of how I ended up working as a grad student with Professor Danny Wong, one of the greats in biotechnology, which I'm happy to tell your audience about. But I ended up doing a PhD with Professor Wong at MIT, and that's how I got into the into the biotech field, having come from hardcore chemical engineering.
Now, we've all heard about Danny Wang, or Professor Daniel Wang, and he's had an absolute huge mark on many of our careers. So why don't you go ahead and share that story? And then I also have a follow-up question for you, and maybe you could, most of us do a PhD. You do the DSc. So what's the difference, Rahul, between these two? I was curious about this.
Yeah, so the story goes like this. When I was looking for a PhD mentor at MIT, I identified Professor Wong as one of the people that I wanted to work for. So I went to see him, and I said that, "Sir, I want to work with you." And he said, "Sure, get in line. There are 14 people ahead of you, and I have 4 slots." So I was very demoralized by that, because I thought the odds were very low. But I kept going to his office every day. And I stood in front of his office every day, and he would look at me and say, "No, no, no." Every day, there would be no chance. Ultimately, one day he said, "Young man, you're in luck. The 10 people ahead of you have taken somebody else's project. So I have 1 more slot left. So you're in." So it's a story in persistence, I would say. And even though I don't think I was as well qualified as many of my other colleagues who had done a lot more research as an undergraduate, having come from the US universities who have those opportunities, and were much more familiar with biotech and knew what they wanted to do, as opposed to me, who just had an intuition to go into biotech. I was very fortunate that I was able to squeeze myself into that group. And that I have to say was one of the many pivotal points in my career, is to be able to work with Professor Wong. And there are so many stories about that journey in my many years of research with Professor Wong, because it was not an easy journey. And to answer your question about SCD versus PhD, I think there is no difference, to be honest, PK. I think it's just a fancy degree title that MIT confers, and all you have to do is wear a different gown at graduation. So it's just a unique degree that is given by a few institutions in the United States, MIT being one of them. But the qualifications and that you need to earn the degree are the exact same qualifications that you need for a PhD. So I just chose to be an SCD, or Doctor of Science, as opposed to a Doctor of Philosophy. And I wore a blue and gold gown as opposed to a red and black.
Wonderful. But Rahul, in all this, I think, as you said, and many people before us, wise men before us, have said that inspiration is perhaps 1%, perspiration is 99%. You could be the most intelligent person in this world, but if you're not willing to work hard for it or take advantage of what you have, and I think what you said in a very simple way, in a very humble way, also really reflects on how you've gone about your career. And I'm sure we will unwrap a little, and we will be treated to some more stories. Moving forward, Rahul, as you said, now that you are now in the US and you're settled in, you've done your PhD, what were the learnings, sort of, if there were some anecdotal learnings that when you moved from India to US, could you share some of those stories? I'm sure all of us have some of those little twits and bits as you travel, but you sort of took baggage at all and settled in the US. So,
yeah, I think that when you do an undergrad degree, and it's especially in a very high pressure place like IIT, I think you're very focused on what it takes to get through an exam, for example, or even if you have to learn, it's very clear as to what you have to learn. There's a high level of certainty in terms of what you need to do to be successful.
Right.
You have to do X, Y, and Z. You have to study these things. You have to go through certain quizzes, certain midterms, and then you have certain exams that you have to pass. And if you do well in those, you'll get a good grade. That was how you were trained. That's how I was trained. The PhD program was very different for me, because for the first time in my life, I was thrown in, like as if thrown in the middle of the pool and was asked to swim. Because the biggest difference, at least in the program that I was in, was that nobody was there to help you in terms of telling you what to do. Even Professor Wang, while I was very fortunate to work with him, was very busy. He had 30 students or postdocs, and I had to actually make an appointment with him to sit with him, and he had very limited time. And he would give me like cryptic ideas in terms of what I could do as a research project. And then it was up to me to go and think about it and deeply understand that concept and see if there was a problem that needed to be solved. Because Professor Wang would throw a few ideas in front of me and say like, hey, see if you can do something in this area. And a couple of times I had a false start. We'd start something, either I got scooped because somebody else solved the problem before me, or it was just a dry well. There was nothing there. So a couple of years just went like that. And so, finally, as I was like coming into work every day, into the lab, and not knowing what to do. So this is a very scary feeling, right? Because you don't know what to do. And that actually is one of the key things in the long run that becomes central for your success, is that how do you deal with uncertainty?
Sure.
So it's not the specific problem that I solved, which also had some relevance, but it's the ability to deal with uncertainty, is to deal with a situation where nobody knows what the answer is, and connect the dots and be resourceful and to come up with something that makes sense. And this is not probably the experience with other people who go through a PhD, because in many cases they're working with a younger faculty who also has as much incentive to help them because they need to get the papers out and so on and so forth. But that was not the case with me. It was literally, you have to go find the problem and then solve it. And it better be a good problem to solve, which is relevant, that it can get published in a good journal.
Sure.
So, I think that was very frustrating, to be honest. That journey was difficult. After 3-4 years, I went home in India. My mother said, like, when are you going to finish up? You've been doing this for a while now. And I frankly, I had nothing at that time.
Right.
I had no papers, nothing, no problem. I had nothing to talk about, and I had to kind of change the subject with her so that I didn't impose my issues to her. But literally, I had to go back, and how we ended up on a good problem to solve was a matter of me talking to a bunch of people. So this is the other part, is like you do some work yourself, then you keep discussing it with other people to see if they can connect the dots. And one thing led to the other. I was able to find a very interesting application of some of the technology I developed that led to the unraveling of a problem that led to the publication of the research in Science as a first author. I had only one paper, one first author paper in Science, and that led to my PhD in MIT. But that's the journey. So the bottom line is the PhD program is different from an undergraduate because you have to deal with uncertainty. And the real education is not about the specific problem you solve.
Yeah.
Because a specific problem you solve might get you the first job because somebody may say like, well, this is exactly what I want you to do here.
Correct.
That's not the real issue about the PhD. It's about the ability to deal with uncertainty and to be able to have the confidence that in spite of the fact that you don't know what the pathway is, insofar as you know where you need to go, you'll figure it out. This idea of you will figure it out. The ability to figure it out in an uncertain environment is the true learning of a PhD.
I think what you have just said, Rahul, to some of the PhDs or some of the scientists out here, I'm sure they're reliving their days, because you really hit it on the head, is that a PhD is sort of getting your thinking process right. It's aligning, not just solving the problem. It's building your resilience. It is building your ability to think out of the box, if I may say so, or as you said, connect the dots. And sometimes you are lucky and sometimes you're not. But when today you reflect or people look at you, they look at you as a person, who literally had the path laid out. And what you're trying to say is, yes, the path was there perhaps, but I had to make every single block of it there. There is no easy road. It was not easy.
No, it was very frustrating. And It was very tough. It was very hard. So anyhow, I think it's easy to look back and reminiscent on these things, but those days, living those days were very hard. And I still can put myself in at that time and feel, when you are down or something, you put yourself and say like, where have you come from?
Sure.
And it just kind of gives you a smile on your face that things aren't so bad. Things were much worse.
Absolutely. The other thing is, when we do a PhD and then we have to transition from a PhD into the real world, sometimes having a great institute and a great professor is advantageous, and sometimes it is not, because people's perception goes like, it can go both ways. So what prompted you that or was it an easy transition, or that you were determined that I'm going to leave MIT and get into a job, or was there a postdoc in mind, or how did you transition? Because you went to Merck, perhaps straight as you finished your PhD.
So in those days, like I'm talking about 93, 94 timeframe, when I was looking for a job.
Right.
The biotech industry wasn't that big.
Right.
Today we have 800 public companies in biotech. So there's a lot of jobs available in the US.
Right.
But in those days, there were like 10 or 15 companies in biotech. Like there was Biogen and Amgen and Genentech and Genzyme, maybe 4 big ones and a few handful of small companies.
Correct.
And then the big pharma companies. And the economy wasn't great at that time. So there were not that many jobs. And also I had done a thesis in an area which was not like relevant to anybody. Like I hadn't done something in purification or something in fermentation that people will jump and say like, well, this guy has some relevant experience and he can at least deliver something, he can solve a problem right now. I had done something which was like cell biology problem that I had solved using engineering, which was a very theoretical kind of thing, abstract kind of thing. So I was very fortunate that during my conversations with a few people who gave me an interview, I ran across Barry Buckland at Merck.
Yes.
And he had, he's another one of those pivotal people that have come in my life after Professor Wong, who took a chance on me and gave me a job at Merck. Just even though he knew that there was nothing that I had, like there was no relevant skill that immediately I could go and work in the lab and solve it. He recognized the same thing that I was telling you, that the training was there, and that once you throw them in the pool, they'll be able to swim. It's a different pool.
Correct.
And Dr. Buckland, Dr. Barry Buckland, who I'm still very close to, took a chance at me, and I learned. I started my journey in the private sector there. I had not, to answer your specific question about postdocs, that was not on my mind. I wasn't planning on taking an academic position because I wanted to go in industry. So that the path was available, and it was just more difficult in those days than it is today. But I was very fortunate that Dr. Buckland, and by the way, at Merck at that time was very prestigious. Getting a job at Merck was very big. Even today it is, but in those days it was like it was considered one of the top companies to work for, because there weren't that many, and it had been rated like #1 company in Fortune magazine 7 years in a row. So there was an aura about it. So it was a bit of a dream job at that time for me. And by the way, this is something we can talk about later, or whenever the right time is, about the career choices that you make, and whether big company or a small company, or being an executive versus an entrepreneur, what do you want to be is very important to know early. And I think I can tell you about my own journey in terms of what my instincts were and how I kind of weaved through my career. But anyhow, at that time it was a relief to just get a job. And there's of course some constraints, by the way. This is I was an immigrant. I did not have a green card. I didn't have a working visa. So those also impose constraints in your choices.
Absolutely.
So that also played a factor in terms of what was possible for me. It reduced the number of options. But anyhow, I was thankful that I had a job. Somebody sponsored me for a green card, and it was a prestigious organization.
It's fascinating to hear this. But then after Merck, which I truly agree with you, is one of the most fascinating or prestigious company. I mean, who hadn't heard of Merck? And this is like more than a 200-year-old company. You went to Novavax and you turned it around. And I do know, and I've read a few things of how spectacular your sort of, I would say, growth was at Novavax. So maybe I would like you to sort of not only that, but also reflect on, like, when you made this change and you achieved what you did, as you rightly said, how did you describe those career choices from Merck to Novavax? What were those key things? Because that will help. We have some young people on the call today and on the chat today. So
yeah, thank you. That's another lesson, I think, what I might be able to help some folks think about these type of things. Like when I was thinking about making a change from Merck, I had spent 10 years there. Merck was very good to me. They had given me an opportunity to grow. I had changed my job within Merck 3 or 4 times. So I had gone from an R&D process development scientist to becoming a director of a manufacturing unit. So I had gone from R&D to manufacturing. So I had a few different facets of the business that I had direct responsibility for. Right. And they had also asked me to run a project team, which was a product development team that was responsible for developing a new vaccine. So in those 10 years, I had the experience to not only have the ability to manage people and manage a group, and and later on become a line manager from and at the same time having the opportunity to sort of integrate a product development team where there were many people who were much higher ranks than me. So a lot of the people on that project were higher in rank, like several of them were VPs, senior directors. I was a director level person. And it was almost like running a biotech company, because that small project that I was running was integrating our preclinical and clinical and CMC and commercial. All of those things were sort of integrated to move the program forward, regulatory. So this was an incredible experience, that holistic experience that I got at Merck. And I was very grateful for the company for giving me those opportunities. But after 10 years at Merck, I had gotten to a point where I felt like I could do a lot more. And you always will find yourself in that position sometimes. And the first thing you should always do is go to your manager and say, like, I can do more, please give me more. And I did that. I told my manager that I'm able to do more, give me more responsibility. I'm hungry, I'm anxious. But they didn't give me much. And so then I took it in my own hands and said, like, I'm going to look outside and see if I can find something. And I had 4 opportunities that ranged from being employee number 5 or 6 in a small biotech company, to going to Genentech, which had become a big company at that time, but still has a different aura around it, to Novavax. Now, Novavax at that time, nobody knew what Novavax was.
Correct.
We're talking about 2000.
3 and 4 around that time.
Right. 2003 to 2004. Novavax was no name company. It was a publicly traded company on NASDAQ, but nobody knew about this. And so when I spoke to them and they offered me a job, it was a very different environment to go into as compared to Merck. Merck was it was a blue chip company, and you could go and say, like, I work for Merck, and people would like give you some credibility right there. And suddenly you're saying, like, okay, I'm going to go from this very prestigious company where you have a good career track, which was the case, even though I was not getting what I wanted, but I was a very high potential person there, as per the managers. To go to a company like Novavax, which nobody knew, was taking a huge career risk.
Sure.
Right? First of all, nobody knew about the company. Second, from a financial standpoint, this company was not secure. And thirdly, it was going in a very different area. I was working in vaccines at Merck, and Novavax at that time was not a vaccine company. It was a formulation company of estrogen and other type of steroids. So this was like a complete shift in career, going from an area that I had spent 10 years and had some level of expertise, to completely outside the comfort zone. So you would say, like, well, why did you make the choice, right?
Yeah.
3 strikes: no name company, not financially secure, and going into an area where you're not an expert. You would say, like, you should have gotten your head checked. Why did you go there?
Right.
But the reason I did this was, number one, I felt valued there. The CEO of the company truly believed in me and had a very high regard for me. And I felt good about the fact that they valued me so much. That's an important thing.
Absolutely.
Where do you get valued? I was very happy at Merck. I was financially secure. I had a good job, but perhaps I wasn't as valued. That was number one. Number two, I got a seat at the table.
Correct.
At the senior management table, right? I was a direct report to the CEO of a publicly traded company. That puts you in a senior management role as opposed to a middle management role.
Absolutely.
And number three, financially, it was much better for me. They almost doubled my salary.
Wonderful.
And that was important in those days.
Well,
so honestly, there were a lot of cons, but those were the pros. And I took those pros and I said, okay, what is the worst thing that can happen? The company can go to zero. But I still have my degree. I still have the experience I will gain. And yes, it'll be a little bit of a difficulty, but I will come out of it. And that's the confidence I had in me. So, sometimes these type of opportunities will come and they look as if it's not an appropriate change, but you need to think through the pros and cons, and what may not be what may appear on the surface to be not a great choice. And by the way, many people that I talked to told me I was being stupid doing and so in spite of that, I took I listened to my own instincts and I took the job.
Right.
And it was difficult, to be honest, because within 18 months of joining Novavax, the company was on the brink of bankruptcy.
Wow.
Because that formulation technology that had led to a new product, which was in the market, didn't work or didn't sell as well. It was a commercial failure. And so within 18 months, we were staring at a bankruptcy situation. And at that time, the board asked me that you become the CEO. Now they were seeing the plane was going into the ground. They thought I was like sitting there as a naive person. I will take the job. So that was the circumstance in which I got the job. It was not because I was particularly well qualified.
Absolutely.
It was just that I happened to be a young buck who was eager, and they just thought that, what's the worst thing that can happen? It is going into the ground anyway. He is going to take it into the ground. Because they had no chance of hiring a bona fide CEO at that time. Because everybody who had any sense would look at the company and say, like, this is going to zero.
To zero.
So anyway, I as a naive person at that time, and sometimes ignorance is bliss. He just said I had nothing to lose. Took the job when they offered me, and luck helped me at that time, and we were able to turn the company around.
And that is what I want to come now. I mean, there are some fantastic things that you did, which were sort of groundbreaking. Are some of those technologies still available at Novavax, what you started? I know you put them on a path of vaccines, but were some of those platform technologies that you sort of developed or initiated, are they still with Novavax right now? Are they still working on some of those? If you can throw some highlight on that.
Yeah, so the thing that was interesting was that why did we pivot the company from formulations into vaccines? And that was because there was a small group in Novavax that was working on vaccines, and they were working on this virus-like particle technology.
Sure.
And they had created flu vaccines using these VLPs. And I had experience in this, having come from Merck.
Absolutely.
So I knew what VLPs were, having worked on things like HPV, which were VLPs.
Yeah.
So this was very familiar territory for me. And so I got very attached to that group. And even though it was considered like an orphan child at that time at Novavax, because nobody cared about him, they were self-funding themselves through NIH grants. I got very close to it. And the pivot we made was once the board asked me to become CEO, I said, like, we're going to actually shut down the commercial operation. We'll shut down the sales operation, which is very counterintuitive. Like, you're shutting down a revenue generating business and going into a preclinical program in vaccines.
Sure.
But we didn't have a McKinsey or a BCG to help us with that analysis. Yours truly basically did that analysis, thinking that if you think about, if you're wildly successful as a formulation company versus a vaccine company, which one will be a bigger company? A vaccine company would be a bigger company. That was the analysis. There was not like some deep, discounted cash flow analysis or something like that. That's the other thing, is a lot of the decisions that are made, that are pivotal decisions, are made by common sense, not necessarily by deep, analytical stuff. So we basically made the decision that we are going to pivot to vaccines because of that very early sort of data that we had that showed that this virus-like particle approach could work in creating a pandemic influenza vaccine. And that there was one paper that just came out as I became CEO, that was published not in a top journal, but in a journal called Vaccine, which is a reasonable journal. It's not a Science or Nature, but that paper basically showed that a product made with the virus-like particle approach could create a H7 and 9, or one of those pandemic strains vaccines, and could protect animals against a challenge,
Absolutely.
a live challenge. That was the only data we had. And we took that information to say like, okay, this is the technology we are going to go after. And so this virus-like, recombinant virus-like particle technology that we had at that time is exactly what they are using now for making the COVID vaccine, except that they've added an adjuvant, but the antigen technology is the same.
Fantastic. Now, quickly moving thing. I mean, it's fascinating. I know we can go on for a long, long time. And that's the interesting thing of having a fantastic person like you, Rahul. But coming to your equally exciting venture, resilience, it's truly amazing how you've absolutely altered the game in a competitive market like United States. It's fascinating. Can you take us through like how did this concept start? How did you initiate? And we will stop there and I'll ask you the next question after that.
Yeah, so resilience, as you know, was started about 2 years ago. And I had been thinking about this problem of CMC in manufacturing, having worked in vaccines for majority of my career, that where CMC in manufacturing were critical issues. Yes. And they were not just critical from the standpoint of complexity and the need for innovation there, because cost was important in vaccines. It was the part in the pharma industry where you needed to really innovate to survive. It's very different compared to some other parts of pharma industry, at least in the US, where there's a big gap between price and cost, and the pressure isn't as high on innovation. But in vaccines, the innovation has to be part of the game to really make things commercially viable. Anyway, so that had been something on my mind for a while, but I wasn't getting any traction on that concept that we needed to do something big in this area because most people were quite happy with the situation. This changed in the pandemic when it became obvious to folks that would normally not think about manufacturing, because these were investors that would invest in biotechnology or in biology more than anything else, as people had been doing for decades. Suddenly became aware of the fact that we hadn't invested enough in manufacturing science. We hadn't invested enough in supply chain resiliency. And it was becoming very obvious in the middle of the pandemic when even a country like US was on its knees, waiting for, ventilators, PPE and basic things from other parts of the world. And it became obvious that what are we going to do with vaccines? What are we going to do with therapeutics like antibodies if we are not even able to secure all these simple things? With the supply chains are all like globally connected, and we cannot get stuff from certain countries.
Sure.
So that was the catalyst for resilience. But the problem was that you could not create a company that would only support a pandemic which would come once in a blue moon. That was not a basis for a sustainable company. So, but the thing was that this new biology that was coming through in the last decade, which was coming from the genomic revolution, this new biology that was leading to targeted therapies, leading to curative therapies like cell therapies, gene editing, nucleic acid medicines, that these type of newer ideas needed a very different manufacturing background. Mm-hmm. It was not the same background as somebody who makes small molecules or capsules or even antibodies. So many of these required delivery vehicles that were like viral vectors or required just cells as medicines, which were very different modalities. But the interesting thing was that many of these skill sets were exactly the same skills that you need in making vaccines. Sure. Because many of the vaccines are viruses, many of the vaccines required cell culture. So there was this interface that if you create a company that would be valid for the new biology, for the emerging medicines, then there is an intersection between that and what you need to also be good in vaccines. So you could create a company that in peacetime would be serving the market in these emerging modalities, but would have the workforce that would always be warm, would always be ready, and you would have facilities that all could be pivoted to support the production of vaccines in the case of a pandemic. So that was the double bottom line that led to the formation of the company. And the idea was like, who do we take inspiration from this industry? That is an absolute athlete in manufacturing. And we found that we didn't have one in our industry.
Sure.
We had to look outside the industry and say, like, who is an athlete in manufacturing where other companies really depend on them? And we found that, okay, in the semiconductor industry, we can look at somebody like a Taiwan Semiconductor. It's such an athlete that even companies like Apple, companies like NVIDIA, companies like Qualcomm, AWS would look at them and say, like, we can get our chips made by them, and we don't have to do any work. They can just do everything for us. That is the kind of company we wanted to create in an industry where doing it yourself was the default.
Absolutely.
Right? I mean, you talk to any company, they want to do it themselves. That's the first choice. Only when they cannot do it themselves because they have no money or they have no facilities or they don't have the time, do they go to a service provider. But it's not a default.
No.
It's not like Apple that the first thing they think about it when they make a new chip is to go to TSMC, Taiwan Semiconductor. They don't start doing their fab first and saying, that's my first choice.
Sure.
That's the difference we wanted to create. So we wanted to build a company in this space where we became the athletes. The first choice for everybody to go to solve their problems, and particularly for these emerging modalities, which required three things. Required very high quality talent, absolutely A team. It required a lot of money, a lot of capital, and it required an ethos of R&D. That you cannot do that by simply taking orders. You cannot do this. You cannot become a leader simply by having other people do the work and then just taking orders and just doing the work. So those three things became the bedrock of the company. And that led to, and again, I'll go back to my PhD, no real idea of how to build the company, no real idea of how to get my PhD thesis, just having a vision. Same thing here. We had a vision of what we wanted to build, but the roadmap wasn't given to us.
Sure.
And we created the roadmap every day. Every day, we created our own roadmap. Because when you look back today, the company is about 2 years old. We have 14 sites in the United States and Canada. We have end-to-end capability to produce anything from vaccines, all modalities of vaccines, biologics, cell therapies, both immunotherapy and regenerative medicine, gene therapy vectors, and nucleic acid medicines, from preclinical product to phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, commercial, in all of the 5 modalities, a complete stack in those 14 facilities that we have in the last 2 years. To be able to create a network of that kind, if somebody told me when I started the company that was my business plan, they would have said, like, you definitely should go to a mental hospital.
No, Rahul, this is so fascinating. I mean, you've already answered a few things, but just to give a sort of a assumption of the kind of big money that you are talking about, if I'm not wrong, you have raised upwards of $2.5 billion, if I'm not mistaken. Is that the right number?
Yeah, that's correct. So about 2.1 in equity financing, about $500 million in government money and in debt money. So over $2.5 billion.
Fantastic.
2 years.
I remember meeting you once when you had recently taken up the job, and you had said, in 1 month, I added something like 350 employees. And I said, how? We went over and took over this plant. I think it was somewhere in Florida or somewhere it was. It was fascinating listening to the stories. Now, coming to this, Rahul, I mean, we've heard of things. I know you're very ambitious and you have even as you say it, but you have a deep vision and focus of where would you like to see resilience in the next 12 to 25 months. Would you, I mean, I know I'm not asking for you to any confidential information, but if you would cover maybe the top 3 areas you would focus on, or, where do you see you really making a difference? And then I see a lot of questions coming from our audience as well, so we may reflect on some of them.
Yeah, so I think the number one thing for me in terms of satisfaction is customer service. That we want our customers to think that when they come to us, they're fully delighted. They get the service that they were promised. And that could be because of our technical capabilities. That could be because of our ability to deliver on time, the reliability factor. It's the comfort that they get when they see our people and say, like, oh, if I give my product to these folks, they are going to take care of it. And that to me is the biggest satisfaction. So, ultimately, that's why the company exists. Now, how that happens is because we are going to use technology. We are going to use technology in our factories to reduce error, to go from 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 sigma operations and beyond. This is because we have technology that we're developing to come up with better answers so that we have higher yields. And the fact that we can use our knowledge of what we're trying to make to accelerate the development, the production of the materials without making errors. So I think those three factors, better answers, better facilities, and having the people who could take the project and accelerate the timelines because they have so much intuition in that they have had so many reps in doing that work that they know exactly what to do, so they don't have to reinvent the wheel. Those three things are the key things that ultimately lead to customer service, better customer service, that leads to better reputation of the company, which then becomes a flywheel. The better reputation you have, the more people come to you, and the better you become because the more exercise you get. So I think that is the way we are trying to build the company. So it's a very simple vision for me, is that 3, 4, 5 years down the road, whatever the time is, that our customer base increases and that the customers are very happy with the work that we're doing for them.
Fantastic. Now, coming to a little bit of a personal, given the fact you have 14 sites, given you expanded, or rather exploded into the world, what does a typical Rahul Singhvi day look like? I mean, that would be fantastic. What does a typical look like? Or, how do you balance time to do whatever you do in the entire day?
I must admit, PK, I don't live a very balanced life. And unfortunately, that is the honest truth. If somebody told me, and I'll tell your audience that I live a very balanced work life, I would be lying. So I have a very skewed life that is very focused on work, and it's almost like 24/7. So majority of the times I'm working out of my home. We have 3 factories in Boston area where I live, by the way. And I tried not to do any official meetings before 10 o'clock. I keep about those first few hours of the day to myself. Sometimes they are my time, and sometimes they get stolen by somebody, but the first few hours of the day are mine. The 10 to 7, 8, 9, 10 is work. And during that period of time, I would just tell you one thing, that it's constant, but I take breaks during the day. And I either, even for 10 minutes, I'll lie down, take a nap, or something like that. That it's that high intensity interval training kind of exercise where you work hard for 1 hour, take a break, work hard another hour, then take a break. That is the way that I'm trying to sustain this kind of a pace, where you have to have your game. You have to be at the top of your game in every engagement, whether it's a customer, whether it's an investor, whether it is a deal that you're making. You got to be on the top of it. You cannot be tired. You cannot have low energy. And the only way I've been able to sustain myself, is because of this high intensity interval training kind of approach of taking breaks. And second, I have to give credit to my family. My wife has been incredibly supportive of this highly selfish lifestyle that I lead right now, because I'm not paying as much attention to the family, to be very honest. And I want to be clear with your audience as well, that don't have any qualms about the idea that, look, that you can do both. You have to make a choice, and if you don't have a life partner who's able to carry on with you at least for some period of time, you have no chance.
Sure. I think that's wise words. But no, I also know, but you also do sometimes cycle to office. So there is some amount of exercise that you bring into your daily life. So I do know that. Now, many of our audience here are young and building their careers. And the advice that you gave them is, you got to have a lot of focus, a lot of intent. Generally, you have to be in it to live it. That's exactly what I come out of it. What if these guys wanted to get into entrepreneurship? You got into entrepreneurship slightly late. Nowadays we hear people going straight from college into entrepreneurship, but everything has its pros and cons. What would you do? Your advice to them about entrepreneurship?
Yeah. So this comes back to the career choices I was trying to tell you about. What is your instinct, right? Some people like stability. Some people like a steady pay. They don't want too much volatility in their life. That may not be the right option for them, and they can become very successful, but they can take on more of an executive job.
Sure.
I see these folks as very bright, but they are more organized. They're more focused. They want to work with systems, and that's what creates them. That mindset can lead them to become really great leaders of large organizations, but that's an executive job. When you're if you find yourself your instincts to be one of not necessarily somebody who can take a lot of risk, because I don't think that entrepreneurs are risk takers. They are people that are open to going into uncertain situations where the upside is high. There's a probability of upside. It's not a guarantee.
Sure.
But they want to get into an environment where there's upside that's outside of the norm, and they want to be able to get access to that upside while reducing risk. So what can you do to get into a situation where you can have upside, but you do it in a way where your chances of failure are reduced? So a simple way of thinking about this is that heads you win, tails you don't lose much.
You get
that is the way. Yeah. But that's a very different mindset than somebody who's not even flipping the coin.
Sure.
If you don't want to even flip the coin and have the option of having tails when you called heads, you shouldn't be in entrepreneurship. So if you don't even want to flip the coin, don't even go there. But if you are interested in flipping the coin and getting the heads and taking the pleasure of that upside, then also be prepared to take the downside, but do everything possible that the downside is as low as possible. And that is true entrepreneurship. You know why we have had such great success with entrepreneurship? It's because of that. It's because people who are entrepreneurs are risk takers to the point that they want the volatility, they want the upside. They want to be in an environment where there is a possibility of that upside, but they do it in a way where they reduce their downside. And that is why the world has done so well with entrepreneurs. That's why if you look at the United States, at least the environment that I live in, the reason why this country has propelled itself so much is because of entrepreneurship.
Absolutely.
And that's not because people were taking unreasonable risks. This is not because people were using the kind of adage that greater risk, greater reward. That is a fallacy. Greater risk doesn't lead to greater reward. This is like, that's not the point of entrepreneurship, is getting the reward in spite of the fact that you reduce the risk.
Rahul, that's a fantastic point to end our conversation for today. And we will now transition to getting questions. There are a lot of people who are asking questions, and we could just carry on. Maybe we should have you again on another one to continue with our wonderful discussion. But before we end, Malvika, please, over to you. I'm sure there are a lot of people who have asked.
There are a lot of questions that we have, and
Yeah.
I think the inspiration has been both on, knowing more about the biotech in the industry and how, you transition that journey, and also a lot of questions on entrepreneurship itself, because that part of it was really inspiring. I'll just read out a few questions that our audiences have shared with us. The first one, Manish Nayak asks, could you please share your thoughts about SPACs, Special Purpose Acquisition Corporation?
Yeah, so SPACs are unique vehicles that you can use to take a company in the public setting. So these are publicly traded entities that have no technology in them. They simply have money in them. And so they are waiting for some project to come in and start operations and create value. But what it does for a company that is an operating company is that it gives you access to capital right away. And it gives you access to not only an initial set of capital that comes from the SPAC, which has some money in it, but it allows you to be listed on the exchange. So it gives you access to continuous capital through that listing. So it's a way to go public. If I can use like common lingo. But it's a very specific way of going public through the use of these specialty vehicles that are already public, but reverse merging into them, creating an operating company that has now access to the money that is in that SPAC, and then list it so that you have a stock that can trade, and then you can raise money through the normal channels as a public company.
Wonderful. The next question is from Vivek Chandra. He says, he thanks you for the engaging discussion. He says that since you've been building capacity in the US for novel biologics, what do you think is the trend for outsourcing to countries like India, especially for novel biologics?
Yeah, look, I think one thing I will tell you is that if India wants to be successful in that game of outsourcing, they have to spend time into becoming R&D organizations and money. So if you continue to be an organization that is only taking orders because you're largely leveraging cheaper labor or some other competitive advantage, then you'll never become a leader. So the companies in India that want to have the ambition to become leaders in new biology have to either invest in R&D so that they have good answers, that they have the ability to hire high quality talent and retain that talent, and they have the ability to create trust with the client, that once the technology is in the hands of the Indian company, not only will it be secure, but it will also be in good hands because the talent is excellent, and that they would be able to add value to that through their R&D and their knowledge. When you have those type of things, then India can be very successful in this process of outsourcing. I don't like to use the word outsourcing, to be honest. I like to use the word partner, because you're not doing half the work and outsourcing the rest of the work. You're simply saying, like, I'm not going to do manufacturing, or I'm not going to do CMC. I'm going to have some partner do this for me, who's an equal partner. And the only way you can be on equal grounds is if you come with those three things: trust, talent, and technology.
Wonderful, wonderful. This other question is from Rityunjay Chaya. He is actually currently studying in class 12. He says that, inspired by your obviously transition between IIT and MIT, he wants to know, should students emphasize on independent learning and self-discovery of concepts, or is it that you learn most of these things, during college and progressing through college?
So, the whole concept of education has changed so much, right? Since I was in college. I mean, it's absolutely very different. I mean, you won't believe how many times I sit in my relaxed moments in front of YouTube and watch stuff that I wanted to learn. I wanted to always learn, but I never had the time. And it's amazing how much you can learn through self-education without going to college. That's so from that perspective, I do think that's possible to get a lot of education through self-learning. I mean, you don't necessarily have to get the degrees, but it also depends on your own nature. It depends on your own comfort level. I have to tell you something. I couldn't learn certain things just by reading books or watching videos. I had to be in a classroom setting. I had to be in a structured setting. I needed to learn through taking exams. So it's an individual thing. Some people are highly disciplined and they can get through the book without the pressure, the peer pressure that you have in a classroom setting, or the teacher or the professor giving you that peer pressure. I don't have that discipline. I'm too distracted. So for me to be able to truly understand certain things, I have to be in a classroom setting. And so it is a unique situation for each person, but I can tell you that the options are big these days. They're very many more options today than they were when I was in college. But it is something that an individual has to decide on themselves based on their own nature.
Right. Thank you so much. In fact, there's so much interest in our Q&A section about, your challenges and how you kind of navigated the entrepreneurial route. Just summarizing some of those thoughts, one question for you, Dr. Rahul Singhvi, is that we hear about so many different founders and their stories. Can you share maybe one challenge which is particular to your industry, for founders who are trying to build innovative and disruptive products in biotech? So is there like a very specific particular challenge that you think is?
If you really ask me about challenges, they're not technical as much as they're managerial challenges. So maybe I can give you an example. Honestly, when I was at Novavax, it was my first CEO position. I had very little training to be a CEO. I had very little training to be a leader. Because if you think about it, when you're in school and how you were trained, right? I was always, like you said, I tried to be the number one student, right? So, you're always trying to study hard, be the number one person. You're always about yourself, thinking about yourself constantly. And for the first 30 years of your life, that's all you're doing. When you get into a leadership position, you have to flip 180 degrees.
Yeah.
You have to move away from being self-serving and about yourself to being about others. And that doesn't happen overnight. And it doesn't happen because you read a book or somebody gives you some advice. It happens because you make mistakes.
Right.
You make some errors of judgment. And I think the biggest message I can give to your audience is that if you want to be in a leadership position, if you want to be a CEO, if you want to be even an entrepreneur that leads people, you need to move away from this idea of it's all about you. And so you have to unlearn what has been reinforced in your schooling years, in your universities, including MIT. These people always are celebrating the people who are the most smartest people, right? That's not important, or not the most important thing when you're running a company. You don't have to be the person who knows the most. You have to be the person who cares the most. Who cares the most about themselves. The people follow people because they feel they're cared. Not because they know they're following a person who knows a lot. That awe fades away very fast. What doesn't fade away is the fact that they're secure under this person. Those are the learnings, those are the serious learnings. And for me, the journey that I had at Novavax particularly was a journey of extraordinary mistakes. And while we ended up in a good place, the personal beatings that I took by making errors and learning from those errors was the true formation of the person that I am today. And that's the only thing I can tell your folks is that it's not an easy journey. It looks nice. It looks very impressive on paper, but it's a journey that you have to live and learn and grow. And it's not all because of success. It's largely because of failure.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for answering the question so wonderfully. This was extremely insightful. I invite Dr. Prabhuda Kundu to please share, the closing remarks so that we can close the session today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rahul. It was such an inspiration. I also learned a few things today. And as you say, that as you speak to people who are as inspirational as you are and listen to you, it's amazing. I feel that there is so much to look forward to tomorrow and the day after. I mean, thank you, and thank you so much. For all the others who have dropped in their questions, we will share the questions with Dr. Rahul Singhvi. We will try our best because we see a few of you have dropped in anonymous questions. If we don't know who you are, we cannot send you our replies back, but we will try our best. With that, Rahul, thank you so much for your time. It was wonderful. Thank you.
It was a pleasure speaking with you all. Thank you for making this forum available to me. And again, good luck with everything.
Thank you. Malvika, as always, thank you so much.
Thank you, Malvika.
Everyone. All right.
Bye-bye. Good night all. Thank
Bye,
you.
everyone.
Bye.